There's a little railroad bridge and tunnel near Clifton, Virginia in Fairfax County. There, on November 1st, 1970, the day after Halloween, two teenagers were found hung and mutilated under the arch of the tunnel. Their car was later found nearby, abandoned, and under the two teens' feet was a dead bunny, killed by an axe. The locals dubbed this incident the Bunnyman Bridge, and the story goes, on Halloween night, if you drive to the bridge, walk into the tunnel, and turn your lights off, the Bunnyman will appear. He wears bunny ears and wields an axe. He will then try to kill you and hang you from the tunnel, just like them. Now that story is actually fake, and I'm sorry to pull one over on you, but there is actually a lot of truth to the Bunnyman Bridge, as well as most of the stories on this list. Welcome to Tier 3 of the American Urban Legend Iceberg. Now, Bunnyman Bridge is the nickname for Colchester Overpass, which is again in that exact area in Clifton, Virginia, and the legend says that the man literally haunts a bridge carrying an axe or a hatchet, attacking trespassers, couples, or teenagers who come there at night. The most common versions of the story tied him to Halloween, escaped convicts, an asylum transfer, murdered children, murdered rabbits, and bodies hanging from the bridge. Now, the bridge itself is real. The legend is exaggerated, but unlike a lot of the stories that we've covered in the past, Bunnyman does have a real documented origin. Sometime in the early 1900s, a bus or transport vehicle was moving inmates from an asylum or prison through Clifton area. The vehicle then crashed and several inmates escaped into the surrounding woods. Most were found pretty quickly, but one or two weren't. Soon after, locals allegedly began finding dead rabbits hanging from trees near the railroad tunnel. Then human bodies started appearing in the same area, mutilated and strung up just like the rabbits. Eventually, one inmate became known as the Bunnyman, because he either wore a rabbit costume, lived off the rabbits, left rabbit carcasses behind, or just had a strange obsession with them. But that doesn't really matter, because eventually the police finally cornered him near the bridge, but he was struck by a train and killed. Now his spirit returns every Halloween night. In other versions, they say he never died. He still lives in the woods, trying to kill anyone who trespasses into his territory. The classic dares basically go to Bunnyman's Bridge at midnight, especially around Halloween, say his name, honk your horn, stand under the bridge for a certain amount of time, or just turn off your lights, and the Bunnyman will appear with an axe. Sometimes the story ends with people being found hanging from the bridge the next morning. And like I said in the beginning, it's a pretty solid campfire story. A great urban legend and a really fun one in the sense of that it's terrifying. It has everything you want from it. An escaped convict, a train, everyone likes trains apparently, a ghost in some versions, and then an axe. That helps. And it has a weird, creepy child thing like a bunny costume. But like I said before, there is a real origin story to this, and it starts, of course, in Fairfax County, Virginia in October of 1970. Fairfax County historian archivist Brian A. Conley dug into police reports, newspaper articles, and local records and found two credible incidents involving a man dressed up like a rabbit threatening people with an axe. These incidents happened around Burke, Virginia, and not actually at the Bunnyman Bridge itself. The bridge became a symbol of the legend later, but documented events were not necessarily an escaped asylum killer committing murders under the bridge. The first major report happened on the night of October 19th, 1970. A U.S. Air Force Academy cadet named Robert Bennett and his fiancée were visiting family in Burke, Virginia around midnight. They were parked in a car on Giddy Road. According to the report, they saw movement outside the car. Then a man came out of the bushes wearing what Bennett described as a white suit with long bunny ears, and the man started shouting something along the lines of, "You're on private property and I have your tag number." Then he throws a hatchet through the passenger window of the car. Arguably pretty insane. Now luckily the couple was able to drive away and no one was injured, but the hatchet was left inside the vehicle. Police investigated, but they did not find the man. And this is the beginning of the legend of the man in the rabbit costume at night in the woods attacking people in a car with a hatchet. Very Huntress-esque. And I hate that chick. I hope she's dead by the entity. Now, of course, that's a Dead by Daylight reference, by the way, if you're not aware. For those listening to the story, Dead by Daylight is a good, fun game, except I hate it and it pisses me off. Any which way, the second incident happened on Halloween night, October 31st, 1970. Same month, same year. A construction security guard named Paul Phillips found a man standing on the porch of an unfinished home in Kings Park West area. This was also near Giddy Road. This time, the man was described as wearing a gray, black, and white bunny costume. Phillips said the man began chopping the porch with an axe. And the Bunnyman warned him, "You're trespassing. If you come any closer, I will chop off your head." Phillips went to get his handgun from his car, but when he returned, the man had fled into the woods again. No one was injured, and the Bunnyman was never identified. This second report is, of course, why Halloween became permanently attached to the story. Also, random guy on an unfinished porch chopping at the porch might attach itself to the asylum thing because obviously the guy's effing crazy. After the reports, the story blew up locally. Police reportedly received a flood of tips and sightings. Some were probably prank calls, some were schoolyard rumors, some may have been people genuinely scared by the news. One especially interesting detail is that someone identifying himself as the Axeman allegedly called a construction company and complained that people had been dumping things like tree stumps, limbs, and brush on his property. Authorities reportedly tried to stake out the area, but the caller never appeared. That detail makes the real version feel a little less supernatural slasher and probably more like an angry guy who was obsessed with property boundaries and trespassing, wanting to kill people who are causing him slight issues. Which probably a little more dangerous, truth be told. But one of the strangest parts of the story is that in the actual 1970s incidents, nothing happened at Colchester Overpass. Nothing happened at the bridge. Bunnyman Bridge wasn't anything. The overpass became associated with the legend later because it was just a perfect creepy location. A narrow railroad overpass in an isolated, dark, atmospheric area. It kind of just looked like the place where a horror story could happen. And later retellings moved the Bunnyman there because the bridge gave the story a physical landmark. And that's how urban legends evolve. The original story was some lunatic in a bunny suit threw a hatchet through a car window, and it evolved into an undead, escaped killer who haunts a railroad bridge and hangs teenagers from the overpass. Same basic ingredients, way more dramatic. But one of the most important pieces of Bunnyman history is a 1973 University of Maryland research paper by Patricia Johnson. Johnson collected different versions of the Bunnyman story from different students and found 54 variations of the legend over a few years after the incident, which is insane. Roughly within 3 years, the story had already mutated into a dozen different forms. Some versions had a bunny costume, a hatchet or an axe, attacks on cars, dead animals, murderers, escaped inmates, Halloween appearances, bridge hauntings, and trespasser warnings. And this is why Bunnyman Bridge is such a good urban legend case study. You can literally watch the story mutate in real time. Now, an internet version was popularized and seems to be supercharged online in the 1990s. Fairfax County's research points to a widely circulated 1999 version posted on the Castle of Spirits, credited to somebody named Timothy J. Forbes. In that story, Bunnyman was allegedly an escaped convict named Douglas J. Griffin, transported in 1904, who escaped after a crash and became a murderer near the bridge. According to Conley, the specific details in that version are false. The alleged murders do not appear in records, and some institutions mentioned in the story apparently never even existed. But that version became extremely influential because it gave the Bunnyman a full horror movie-esque backstory. Before that, the legend was basically weird guy in a rabbit suit with an axe. After that, it had more lore. The reason the story sticks is because the image is ridiculous and terrifying. A man with an axe is scary. A man with a bunny suit can be funny. A man in a bunny suit with an axe standing under a railroad bridge at midnight, unforgettable, arguably. It hits that same weird horror note as clowns. Something childish and supposedly harmless gets twisted into something threatening. That contrast is the whole reason the Bunnyman really works. Now, what's probably happening? The most realistic explanation is that the original Bunnyman was probably some local, really angry guy about trespassing, dumping construction, or development around his property. He was just pissed off. The repeated language about private property and trespassing is obviously a pretty big clue. He yells about it. He yells about trespassing like twice. And in the Axeman phone call that people talk about, he complains about people dumping debris on his property, which is trespassing. So the true story may just be some guy in Fairfax County who was furious about people coming onto his land, or land that he considered his, and for reasons known only to God and local Virginian weirdness, he decided the best way to handle this was to dress up like a rabbit and threaten people with an axe. And in some cases, throw that axe at them, which is attempted murder, in my opinion. It may not be as supernatural as the legend, but it's still pretty fucking crazy. The Bunnyman Bridge spread because it had, again, everything a local legend needed. A real police report, a memorable monster, a creepy physical location, teenagers daring each other to do stupid stuff, Halloween, newspaper coverage, and no real conclusion. And that last part matters because police never found the Bunnyman and the story had room to grow. There was no mugshot, no arrest, and no boring explanation. Just an unanswered question. Who the hell was that guy? Today, Bunnyman Bridge is one of the most famous urban legends in Virginia, and people still visit the bridge, especially around Halloween. Locals have not always loved that attention because it does bring traffic, trespassing, noise, and people treating the real road like a haunted attraction, but the Bunnyman has also become a part of regional pop culture. Ghost tours, Halloween trails, local articles, videos, and even music projects have used the legend. The story has endured because it feels like it should be fake, but the origin is weirdly real. Ongs Hat is one of those entries that becomes more fascinating the deeper you dig, because it's simultaneously 1. A real place, 2. Fake, and 3. An early internet mystery and one of the first ARGs ever made. It's really a case study in how people convince themselves that fiction is real. So Ongs Hat is a real location in New Jersey in the Pine Barrens. Maybe they met with the Jersey Devil, who knows, but it's a tiny ghost town, basically nothing there. Depending on which historical source you believe, it was either a very small settlement or literally just a stopping point between the woods. The name itself also comes from local folklore about a man named Ong, whose hat supposedly got stuck in a tree, and it became a landmark for travelers, which is kind of funny. And in the late 1980s and early 1990s, a writer and artist by the name of Joseph Matheny began spreading strange documents through the bulletin board systems, zines, mail art networks, FTP servers, and early internet communities. The documents appeared to be real. They were not presented as fiction. They looked like leaked records, interviews, academic papers, and underground publications. But the central claim was insane. It was saying that a rogue group of Princeton scientists had discovered a way to travel in between dimensions. The conspiracy centers around documents called the Incunabula. According to the story, a collection of physicists, mysticists, and researchers had established a secret community in Ongs Hat. There, they conducted research involving quantum mechanics, consciousness, chaos theory, alternate realities, and eventually they created a device known as the Egg. This machine allowed a person to shift their consciousness into another universe, and the Egg became the centerpiece of the entire mythos. From there, things get stranger. According to the story, the scientists discovered an alternate Earth. Not a future Earth, not another planet, just a parallel version of Earth. The dimension was empty and largely untouched. The scientists then moved their community there and established an ashram-like settlement beyond the reach of government interference. In some versions, they could jump back and forth between the real world and the parallel world. The government learned about this project though, and black helicopters would start appearing. Intelligence agencies attempted to seize the technology, and eventually the researchers abandoned their reality almost entirely. And people believed this legend. Now remember, this was pre-modern internet, no Google, no Wikipedia, no fact-checking on all this easily at least. If someone uploaded what looked like an interview or an academic document, technical report, most people had no way to easily verify any of it. Unless they were just like some wicked genius who could say bullshit, or they had common sense, that also plays into it. But the story did reference real people. It referenced real Princeton scientists, real physics concepts, and real location. That mixture of truth and fiction made the narrative feel a little bit more authentic. And that's one reason why it spread so effectively. And the Pine Barrens themselves already do have a strange reputation. Again, the Jersey Devil, that's its home. It has hundreds of miles of isolated woodland, abandoned roads, old towns, ruins, and local folklore. So when people hear that there's a ghost town in the Pine Barrens where scientists opened a gateway into another dimension, it kind of sounded exactly like a story from the Pine Barrens, I guess. The Ongs Hat story becomes historically important when you realize that it's one of the first ARGs. Many researchers consider it the first alternate reality game or proto-ARG. And it came before Marble Hornets, Cicada 3301, Local 58, the SCP Foundation, and most modern ARGs. Obviously, it came out in the 90s. Ongs Hat really played a role in all this and is probably an inspiration for a lot of these ARGs. The creator scattered pieces of the story across multiple forms of media, so people had to investigate, compare documents, search for clues, visit locations, and discuss theories online. And if that sounds familiar, again, it's literally Cicada 3301, almost exactly. Which I love Cicada 3301, it's one of my favorite little stories. The funniest part is that even after the guy who created it admitted he just created most of the story, some people refused to believe him. They argued that's exactly what someone would say if the government forced them to cover it up. In other words, denial became the evidence, which is a classic conspiracy theory problem. Once a story reaches that point, it's impossible to kill. It's the same as the Area 51 conversation we had where the guy who called into Coast to Coast, he said a bunch of crazy stuff, then, the radio station gets cut out. So a lot of people believe that he said something true. Well, later he calls back and says, hey, that was a joke. I'm sorry. It was a bit. But most people said to him like, oh yeah? I bet the government forced you to say that, didn't they? And at that point, it's like, yeah, okay, like you're not gonna win these people over. There's also a little anecdote I love, just a funny story. A guy goes to heaven, he's a conspiracy theorist, and God tells everyone who goes to heaven, you're allowed to ask me one question and I will answer it truthfully. So the guy asks God, did America fake the moon landing? To which God says, no, America did not fake the moon landing, they actually landed on it multiple times and did all these missions. So the guy looks at God, then turns around and whispers to himself, shit, this goes a lot higher than I thought. And it just kind of goes to show that people who really believe these conspiracy theories, like really believe them, they're not going to abandon that belief. But anyways, the legacy of Ongs Hat influenced a lot of internet mystery culture, conspiracies, storytelling, transmedia narratives, and alternate reality games. Many people have called this the missing link between old urban legends and modern internet horror. And it's one of the earliest examples of people collaborating to construct a myth online. Kate Morgan is the famous ghost of Hotel de Coronado in Coronado, California. In 1892, she checked into the hotel under a false name, stayed for several days, and was later found dead from a gunshot wound. At first, authorities did not know who she was, so newspapers began calling her the Beautiful Stranger, and the hotel still promotes her as its most famous ghost. That alone is a pretty good urban legend setup. Beautiful woman, unknown, a luxury Victorian hotel, false name, and missing a man that she was supposedly waiting for and never got to meet. The hotel itself, because the setting does matter here, Hotel de Coronado, opened in 1888, only a few years before Kate Morgan arrived. At the time, it was one of the grandest seaside resorts in America. Massive, elegant, isolated, and expensive. It was also built in that late 1800s Victorian style that already kind of looks haunted, even when it's brand new. But it's also quite beautiful. So when a mysterious woman died there in 1892, the location basically does half the storytelling for you. This is not woman dies at random boring house. This is a beautiful woman, a stranger, dies in a gigantic Victorian beach house, and now guests say that she still walks the halls. So why did this legend survive, and who is Kate Morgan? Kate Morgan is a real person. She was born as Kate Farmer in Iowa, which is a funny last name to have in Iowa because, Iowa's farm. Any which way, her early life was rough. Her mother died when Kate was very young, and she was raised partially by family after that. Later, she married Thomas Edwin Morgan in 1885, and the couple had a son in 1886. However, the baby died only 2 days after being born. And that detail is important because it does give the story some emotional foundation. This was clearly a woman who had dealt with a lot of trauma. By the time she arrives at Hotel de Coronado, she is not just some random ghost story woman. She has a difficult past, a failed or troubled marriage, and very little stability. And that detail is important because it gives the story some more emotional foundation. Some later accounts say that she and her husband were involved in a con artist scheme, which is kind of cool, but some say that she had left him. Some say she was just traveling under suspicious circumstances. But the basic point is, Kate Morgan arrived at the hotel with secrets. She arrived at Hotel de Coronado on Thanksgiving Day, November 24th, 1892, and she checked in under the name Miss Lottie A. Bernard of Detroit. Obviously, that is not her real name, and hotel employees described her as attractive, well-dressed, quiet, reserved, and a bit sad. According to the hotel's own account, she told staff she was waiting for a gentleman to join her, but he never arrived. And this is where the story kind of feels like a mystery novel. Why did she use a fake name? Was she actually waiting for someone, and if so, who? Was it maybe her husband, a lover, a criminal partner, someone who abandoned her, someone who killed her? No one really knows for sure. But Kate stayed at the hotel for probably around 5 days, which, quick thing, where'd she get the money to stay at this hotel? I mean, I'm just wondering. She doesn't sound like she came from the wealthiest backgrounds, but anyways, it doesn't matter. During that time, she reportedly seemed lonely and distressed. Some versions say that she spent time watching arriving trains, waiting for someone. And that detail is often repeated because it gives a story that tragic visual, a woman alone in a luxury hotel, waiting day after day for no one to come. According to the common version, she becomes increasingly hopeless after realizing that he obviously isn't coming. Then, on or around November 29th, 1892, she was found dead. Kate Morgan's body was discovered on an exterior staircase leading towards the beach. She died of a gunshot wound to the head, with a gun found near her. The official explanation was, of course, that she took her own life. At the time, police could not immediately identify her, and that's why newspapers picked up the story as the death of the beautiful stranger. And that nickname does a lot of the work when it comes to this urban legend, because the beautiful stranger sounds something gothic or noir. It turned a tragic death into a legend almost immediately, so the official story, being self-inflicted gun wound, was pretty straightforward. Kate was obviously depressed, abandoned, possibly ill, traveling under a false name, and waiting for someone who did not come, and eventually took her own life. The Hotel de Coronado's own published version leans towards that verdict and describes her ghost as relatively harmless. Fleeting appearances, odd pranks, and unexplained activity rather than like a violent haunting. It's a pretty clear explanation, all things considered. It also fits the Victorian newspaper drama perfectly. Lonely woman, false name, romantic disappointment, tragic end. But of course, this is an urban legend, so the clean explanation is not the only one. Some later people, writers, authors, whatever, argued that Kate may have been murdered. The biggest suspicious detail often mentioned is the claim that the bullet found in her head may not have matched the gun found near her. The argument became associated with later speculation that her death involved foul play. The possible murder theories have usually involved her husband, or secret lover, a con man partner, just someone who she was waiting for, or just some random person who followed her from the hotel. And obviously none of these theories have been confirmed. They are interesting, but they all remain under speculation. So interestingly and officially, Kate Morgan did die by taking her own life. But because of the false name, because the man she was waiting for never arrived, and because later writers questioned details, the story never fully died anyways. And the gentleman she was supposedly waiting to meet is the strongest part of the legend. The hotel account believes that she was waiting for a man after her identity was confirmed. It was later theorized that she had been hoping to meet a lover. That unknown man becomes the ghost story's shadow character. He may not have even existed, but narratively he's perfect because everything becomes a question. Did he abandon her, and if so, why? Did he betray her? Did he kill her, or did she just invent him? Was she just waiting for her husband? Was she possibly running from her husband, or running from someone else? That unanswered question is why the story works so well, and we have to ask the other question of why did she use a fake name? We just talked about her running from someone. Could that be the case? Again, she checked in as Lottie A. Bernard of Detroit. And in the 1890s, a woman traveling alone already attracted a lot of attention. A married woman traveling alone under a fake name attracts even more, which again lends credence to maybe she was running from her husband or trying to meet a lover. She didn't want her family to know where she was or that she was involved in a scheme. She was emotionally distressed or just trying to disappear perhaps, but the false name does not prove murder, of course, but it does prove that she's concealing something. The murder aside, or death of Kate Morgan, whatever it is, there's still the actual urban legend of her ghost. Guests and employees have reported strange activity at the hotel for decades. The hotel itself says Kate's ghost is usually associated with her former guest room, but the sightings and odd activity have also been reported around the entirety of the resort. Some of the reported activities of Kate's ghost include flickering lights, objects moving, doors opening or closing, cold spots, unexplained footsteps, a woman in Victorian clothing appearing before you, electronics acting strangely, I don't know why that's always one of these now, whatever, items falling from shelves in the hotel gift shop, and the feeling of being watched. And some even say that her initials have appeared in steam on bathroom mirrors. The hotel portrays her as more mischievous than malicious, and that's pretty important. She's not an evil ghost. Again, she's kind of a sad presence, still attached to a place where her life ended. And her former room is the center of the haunting. The exact room numbering has changed over time, but as of right now, that is room 3327. So if you ever go to the Hotel de Coronado, you know what room to check out. But the story did spread a lot in newspapers when she died, and I don't like using the word clickbait for a YouTube video, but a mysterious dead woman at a famous hotel was basically 1892 clickbait. The official hotel book on Kate Morgan includes excerpts from San Diego and California newspaper coverage in late 1892, showing how heavily the story was covered right after her death. She became a legend almost immediately. This is not a ghost story invented 100 years later from nothing. It's not a ghost story like the Bunnyman was. This mystery started the exact moment No one knew where she was. I mean, again, this is a real death. She did lose a child and possibly a marriage. She was obviously dealing with a lot of trauma, and it's something terrible. Most likely, she was emotionally distressed and took her own life, possibly disappointed by not getting to meet someone she was expecting. And while the murder theories are interesting, there's just not enough confirmed evidence to overturn the official story. The ghost stories are obviously impossible to verify as well, but they did turn a real historical death into one of California's most famous hotel hauntings. So realistically, Kate Morgan was a troubled woman traveling under a false name. She checked into the most famous hotel in America and waited for someone who never came, leading her to die there. The newspapers turned her into a beautiful stranger, and hotel folklore turned her into a ghost. The legend of the poison dress is definitely one of the stranger legends on this iceberg. According to this legend, a woman would wear a beautiful green dress, usually in the Victorian era, and then later come down with a strange illness. Many assume that the dress was cursed or perhaps poisoned by a jaded lover or an enemy or even a friend. But the truth is wildly stranger than the fiction. So in 1775, Swedish chemist Carl Wilhelm Scheele developed a pigment that would become known as Scheele's green, and the color was brilliant. Before this point, many green dyes would dull or just fade quickly, but Scheele's green was vibrant, rich, and eye-catching. People adored it. By the 1800s, it was everywhere. Dresses, gloves, artificial flowers, children's toys, wallpapers, paint, candles, decorate, the whole shebang. If a Victorian manufacturer could make something green, they probably did. But there was a problem. Scheele's green contained a certain element called arsenic. Yeah, that arsenic, and they used it a lot. Now, a lot of modern people might assume that your manufacturers didn't know that arsenic was poisonous and dangerous. But that's not true, because arsenic has been known to be a poison for centuries. People have used it for murder in the classical era. Yet many manufacturers continued putting it into consumer goods because the colors sold really well. Late stage capitalism, if you want to make that conversation. And the result was a bizarre period where these wealthy Victorians were essentially decorating their homes with poison. I mean, think about asbestos. That was practically poison too, but at least it made sense. It was fireproof, so to speak. This is just the color green. There's no point to this, but whatever, I digress. Women who would wear these fashionable green dresses would sometimes experience things like headaches, nausea, skin irritation, breathing issues, and dizziness. Workers who manufactured said dresses often suffered way worse symptoms. The factory workers handling these arsenic pigments frequently became ill from constant exposure. As reports spread, newspapers began publishing increasingly sensational stories, and the rumors emerged that the dresses were obviously cursed. Some stories would say that women would just collapse at dances. Others claimed that mysterious illnesses followed the purchase of specific garments. In some versions, women died shortly after wearing a particular green gown. These stories grew with every retelling, and eventually the idea emerged that they were literally poisoned dresses circulating amongst the wealthy. And like I said earlier, a lot of the folkloric variations involved a deliberate poisoning from, again, a rival woman, a rejected lover, or a jealous husband secretly treating the woman's dress with poison. But again, it's more so that the companies who sold them these dresses did not let them know, or maybe they just didn't care, or maybe the person who bought it didn't care, it doesn't matter, that they were literally wearing arsenic. So yeah, that's the extent of poison dresses. Don't wear Scheele's green, I guess. Go find a better color. So the next thing on the tier list is Melonheads, and Melonheads are not really a singular legend. It's more of a family of related urban legends spread across Ohio, Michigan, and Connecticut. Which Connecticut feels a little bit like an outlier there, but essentially it all hinges around the same image. A small humanoid figure with a huge swollen head hiding in the woods. Melonheads are usually described as strange, child-sized human or human-like figure with oversized bulbous heads, and depending on the version, they are escaped patients, deformed children, inbred forest people, cannibals, victims of medical experiments, or feral mutants living near isolated roads. And the details do change depending on town to town, but the core does stay the same. Don't go down that road at night because something with a giant head lives in the woods. The simplest version goes something akin to this. Years ago, a group of children or patients were hidden away from society because they had large, misshapen heads. Sometimes they are described as having hydrocephalus, a very real medical condition where fluid buildup can cause swelling of the head. They were either abandoned, experimented on, abused, or forced to live in isolation. Eventually, though, they did escape, and now they live in the woods. So if you drive down the wrong road at night, they may come out of the trees and stare at you, chase your car, attack you, or even try to drag you away into the forest. In the Ohio version, they make them more monstrous. In Connecticut, it leans more into the version of inbred backwoods family folklore, and Michigan versions often attach them to an institution or abandoned mansion of sorts. Ohio probably has the most famous depictions of them. They are usually associated with the Cleveland area suburb of Kirtland, especially wooded roads around Wisner Road and nearby Chardon Township. Local versions also connect them with bridges, cemeteries, secluded stretches of road near Chagrin River. The Ohio legend usually centers around a mysterious figure named Dr. Crow. Dr. Crow was a scientist, or doctor, of course, who lived in a secluded house or facility near the woods. He would supposedly take in orphan children, unwanted children, or just children with medical problems, and then the story splits from there. There's one, the sad version, where Dr. Crow is not evil. He's a tragic caretaker, kind of like Professor X, I guess, and the children were rejected by society because of their enlarged heads, so Dr. Crow took them in, protected them from cruelty, and tried to study them to cure their condition. He normally ends up dying naturally before he finds said cure, and the children are left alone in the woods. So they remain near old buildings and occasionally appear to people who wander too close. And in this version, the Melonheads are obviously not evil, they are just abandoned, sad children who I guess have to become adults at this point, but there's still another version, and this is the more famous version. Dr. Crow is evil. In this telling, he experimented on the children. Some versions say the children already had hydrocephalus. Others say Dr. Crow, I'm sorry, this is really funny to me, because I had a professor named Dr. Crow. He was a nice guy, by all means, interesting teacher. But Dr. Crow, in the story, would cause their condition by injecting fluid or chemicals into their brains. The experiments supposedly made their heads swell into large, hairless, melon-like shapes, hence the name Melonhead. Their bodies obviously became malformed, and their minds became damaged from the fluids. Eventually, the children revolted, though, and they killed Dr. Crow. They burned down the orphanage, laboratory, or institute, whatever it may be, and they fled into the surrounding woods. From there on, the legend gets uglier. Some versions say they actually have reproduced, creating more generations of Melonheads, which I feel like that's derogatory. I feel bad saying Melonheads. Like, if these are real, like, I know this is a real condition, this happens, it feels like a mean, derogatory term, and I'm gonna keep saying it because it's what they're called, but it just doesn't always feel nice. But yeah, some people say they became violent and feral, some people say they hate normal humans. There are stories of them attacking cars, kidnapping children, stealing pets, killing livestock, or of course, practicing cannibalism. It's messed up. And that version makes this feel more like a horror movie. For Ohio, Wisner Road is basically the Melonhead Road. Urban legend hunters, local teenagers, paranormal fans, and kids have driven this road for decades looking for sightings. The road winds through wooded areas, and it's connected in local stories with Dr. Crow's property, a bridge, and the surrounding forest. And this is important because Melonheads are very much a drive there at night kind of legend, much like Bunnyman in that regard. They're not just creatures, they're more tied to a dare, and that dare is, of course, go down Wisner Road at night, turn off your lights, and see what comes out of the woods. The Connecticut version of the story is also steeped in some pretty interesting traditions. Stories are reported from places like Shelton, Trumbull, Monroe, Milford, Oxford, Seymour, Weston, Southbury, Newton. Really just the most of Connecticut. It's not that big of a fucking state. But there's a lot of common Melonhead roads, the most important being Sawmill City Road in Shelton, Velvet Street near Trumbull and Monroe, and Zion Hill Road in Milford. Connecticut's version's a little different though. It's more, again, isolated people in the woods. And in most versions of the story, again, there's an asylum or prison institution that burns down, this time a long time ago. Most of the staff and patients died in the fire, but a few escaped into the woods. So to survive, they turned to cannibalism, seeing a bit of a trend here. And over generations of isolation and inbreeding, it caused them to develop giant heads and deformities. So that's the origin of the Melonheads in this story. Now their descendants live in the woods and attack anyone who wanders into their little territory, which has a lot of local legend DNA. Burn asylum, escape patients, cannibalism, inbreeding, and a forbidden road. It is basically every rural horror trope smashed into one nice little story. But there is another version in Connecticut, and it's a banished family version. This one says that the Melonheads descended from a colonial-era family accused of witchcraft or some other form of social offense. The family was then banished from town and forced to survive in the woods. Over time, that isolation and the inbreeding, again, a trend here, transformed them into Melonheads. Pretty standard folklore structure. They're an outsider group, they're dangerous, so we put them in the woods and then they can kind of become monsters if they want to, who cares. But one of the weirdest Connecticut details is a thing called Dracula Drive, which is funny. A lot of local stories say Melonheads live near the mysterious road called Dracula Drive. But the funny thing is, in many towns, there's not an actual road named Dracula Drive. Instead, it's different towns applying the nicknames to different roads. In Shelton, many people say it's Sawmill City Road. In Trumbull and Monroe, people connect it to Velvet Street. Other places have their own Melonhead roads, like I mentioned earlier, and again, this is the perfect example to see how these urban legends move around. The name Dracula Drive, truth be told, sounds too good not to use. And even though it doesn't really exist, people just attach it to whatever creepy road is nearby. Like I mentioned earlier, Sawmill City Road in Shelton is one of the biggest Connecticut locations. It is narrow, wooded, curving, and passes through isolated areas near reservoirs and private land. A Connecticut folklore site described it as exactly the kind of road where people would believe, or want to believe, something strange lived nearby. Childhood rumors plus a creepy road can really keep these legends repeating forever. Now finally we have the Michigan version. They're associated with the area around Felt Mansion near Holland and Sagatuic in Ottawa County. Very Native American names here. Sorry if I mispronounce anything. The Michigan story often claims that the Melonheads were children with hydrocephalus who lived in a place called Junction Insane Asylum near Felt Mansion. And can we talk about how, like, if anyone had, I swear to God, man, if someone would have, like, a common cold in the early 1900s, and they'd be like, oh, dude, you got a cold, you're sniffling, you're insane. You're crazy. Go to the insane asylum now. It just feels like a bit of a trend here. And it's like, fuck it. Send them all there. Who cares? It's just weird to me. Again, it was like literally anything. Any which way, the children being in an insane asylum is absurd. So the kids said, to hell with it, went feral, and said, we're going to the woods, and we're going to go do whatever we want. Now, some people say they live in the mansion itself. Felt Mansion, of course. Others say they fled into caves or caverns or just abandoned structures nearby. The Allegan County Historical Society has reportedly said that Junction Sanitarium didn't exist, although the site did have a real institutional history in other forms, including a prison at one point. So Michigan version does have a same pattern. Real place, fake, exaggerated institution, abused children, they escape into the woods, and then the legend just kind of grows from there. But Felt Mansion is a real reason that the Michigan legend survives, because it is a real historic mansion built in 1927 by inventor Dorr Felt. And Felt's a pretty cool last name, I feel, in my own personal opinion. So, good for that day and his descendants. Later, the property changed uses, including religious and institutional purposes, which likely helped create rumors about asylums, prisons, hidden children, and abandoned facilities. Which again is just a classic urban legend evolution. A real creepy place gets an invented backstory later. People hear old mansion and institutional property, and suddenly the story becomes deformed children were locked away in here. I'm getting a lot of Resident Evil vibes from this. Anyone else? No? Anyways. Across the 3 states, the details obviously do change, but the ingredients are pretty close to being identical. Remote wooded area, creepy road, children or patients hidden from society, a doctor, an insane asylum or prison or just a banished family, physical deformity, obviously, escape, then isolation. And then, inbreeding and mutation, and cannibalism, I guess. But of course, the most important part of any urban legend is the teenagers daring each other to go look for something. And that's why Melonheads can feel so familiar, even though you've never really heard of them. They're built from a very old American fear. There's a road not too far from when I went to college, and people called it Old Demon's Road. It was about an hour away from where I went to college, and we ended up going there one night, me and some buddies. Our football team just lost the game, and we were all like, to hell with it, no point in going out to the bars now, let's go do something else. And we get out there, we eat dinner at a restaurant in the town, and we asked some questions to some people about it, and they all told us these insane stories, these local legends. And so we go out there, and whoo! Oh boy, that was the scariest experience of my life. We did see some stuff. I will explain that full story eventually, one of these days. But It's insane. Like literally the most insane story ever. But anyways, Melonheads, apparently a lot of people say they just stare at you from the woods. That's a very common story. Like I said earlier, some people say they will chase the cars, attack people who stop, throw rocks at you, which is kind of funny, steal your pets, kidnap your children, eat animals, eat people. They live underground or live in abandoned buildings, and they guard their territory. On the other hand, some versions make them harmless and pathetic to a certain extent. And then you juxtapose that with super cannibal monster murderers. So, a lot of flexibility on that part, and that's one of the reasons the legend spreads so well. A scared parent can tell it as a warning, a teenager can use it as a dare, and a horror fan can turn it into a cryptid monster mystery. Now, from the legend, they're not really cryptids. Some people do list them as that, but they're not, in my opinion. They're not Bigfoot or Mothman. They're human, maybe formerly human perhaps, but I wouldn't quite get into that. And that's kind of the problem where it becomes a little bit uncomfortable. Like I said earlier, a lot of these legends, especially around Melonheads, are clearly inspired by real medical conditions like hydrocephalus. And it can cause that enlarged head, especially when untreated. And it makes this legend feel a little nasty. It turns deformity into horror, and like I said, Melonhead just sounds mean. It's derogatory in a certain way. The same thing happens a lot in these older urban legends, and it shows a lot about culture. People who are different get isolated. They become poor, disabled, socially rejected, and then turned into either fictitious or real monsters. And it just shows how the dark social layer that we impose on people with differences is a real tragedy, especially if this story was true. And it makes me think back to the story where the Melonheads are just nice, scared children, and Dr. Crow is a nice, kind dude just trying to help them. Now, obviously, if they're eating people, that's a different story and a much bigger problem. Then we have the right to go probably, I don't know, clear them out, I guess, if they're eating a bunch of people. But they could just be sad, scared, and alone. And instead of people helping them, we mock them, hide from them, or run from them. It's a weird thing, really. Anyway, that's another side tangent, and I'm sorry for going through a couple of them here. Very clearly, these are probably not real stories. There's no real evidence that Melonheads are real creatures. There is no Dr. Crow, no mutant children, no cannibal colony, no asylum, as we've covered. But what happens in a lot of these isolated areas and old buildings, institutional properties, is a bunch of teenagers just make stuff up. People will see something weird in the woods at night, maybe an old tree stump or an animal or shadow that just looked weird, and turn that misunderstanding into a whole tale that then gets weaved with other people's tales. And when you go to a site like this expecting to see something, you're gonna try and see something. You don't go expecting to see nothing. And that's why a lot of these legends do get bigger and bloat themselves into this level where we're basically making fun of possibly just a dude who had a medical condition in the area one night. Okay, the next one is really silly. It's awesome. Marilyn Manson's Rib Removal. This is such a widespread celebrity urban legend. In it, Marilyn Manson allegedly removed several ribs so he could perform oral stimulation on himself. That's it. That's the rumor. There's no evidence, no witnesses, no medical reports, no credible sources, yet millions of people believe it. But it just spread so effectively throughout the country. I mean, people who grew up in Texas, California, New York, Kansas, Florida, whatever, everyone's heard this exact same thing. And many heard it before widespread internet access from people who swore it was true. Older siblings, classmates, colleagues, whatever, but no one really knows where it came from. Marilyn Manson in the 90s was not just a musician, he was a cultural panic. During the late 90s, he became one of the most controversial figures in America because he wore heavy makeup, contact lenses, leather, corsets, weird clothing, and intentionally cultivated an image designed to upset conservative parents. Everything about his persona screamed, "Your mother's gonna hate me." And the story makes more sense when you remember what America was like in the 90s. The internet did exist, not to the same extent it does now. There's no social media, so people couldn't really fact check these rumors quickly, and information spread through, the water cooler. Researchers studying urban legends have found references going back to at least the mid to late 90s, but versions of the story may be even older than that. Folklore researchers, which is funny that there's actual people researching this topic, discovered that similar rumors were attached to other celebrities long before Marilyn Manson became famous. So it's important to understand that it's not necessarily just about Manson, he just became the latest target of this kind of rumor. and it circulated among other rock stars, actors, musicians, and even athletes back in the day. Folklorists classify these types of rumors as celebrity body modifications. This stuff happens all the time with plastic surgery rumors now, like the buccal fat removal stuff. Every freaking year, I see it about someone, and normally it's not even true. It's just an angle, or they're mewing in that one photo, but whatever. Marilyn Manson got hit with this because he already looked weird, though, and it felt fairly believable. Like, if you were to say Tom Hanks did this, no one's gonna believe you. But Marilyn Manson, motherfucker, yeah, that makes enough sense. He looked like the guy who would try this. And according to most conservative people back in the day, he would do it. But I heard this story as a kid, and I believed it. I believed it up until like a few years ago when I was like, oh, okay, because it's always stated as fact. It's never stated like, did you hear that maybe he did this? And it's like, yeah, no, this guy did it. But Marilyn Manson did respond many different times, and he denied the rumors. He normally just treated it as ridiculous, which, to a degree, it is. He's right. In interviews, he often joked about it because at that point, there's no point in seriously trying to debunk it. One of his most famous responses was essentially, if I could do that, I would never leave the house. But this rumor became so widespread again, it just followed him throughout his whole career. And another reason people ask is, well, could someone actually do that? Technically, rib removal surgeries do exist. Some people do it because they want to look skinnier, or I don't know. I really don't know the full reason. It's weird to me, but certain ribs can be removed for medical reasons. Cosmetic procedures, again, have existed, but medical researchers note that removing a few ribs does not magically turn one into a human pretzel. The rumor dramatically oversimplifies the actual anatomy. But the story does exist. It is funny, so it gets a lot of shock value. Sex sells, celebrity culture is crazy, body modification can make someone a hero or a villain in some cases, and moral judgment is a big deal in this one. But most importantly, it's a story that people just enjoy repeating. And it doesn't have evidence because it doesn't need it. People don't tell this story because it's true, they tell it because it's memorable. The Richmond Vampire, sometimes called the Hollywood Vampire, is an urban legend from Richmond, Virginia. And it's tied to the Church Hill Tunnel collapse and the W.W. Poole Mausoleum in Hollywood Cemetery. The legend says that after a railroad tunnel collapsed in 1925, a blood-covered, fang-toothed creature crawled out of the wreckage. It then fled into Hollywood Cemetery where it vanished in Poole's tomb. That's the horror version. The actual version is still horrific, but in a very different way. In 1925, workers were repairing or reopening an old railroad tunnel under Richmond's Church Hill neighborhood. During the work, the tunnel suddenly collapsed, burying men and machinery underground. As researchers rushed to the scene, something crawled out of the darkness. It was covered in blood. It was burned or charred in some places. Skin was hanging from its body, and it had jagged teeth and looked like a corpse. Witnesses panicked, believing this thing was not a man at all, but some creature living beneath Richmond. This creature then ran through the city towards Hollywood Cemetery, then just disappeared into the mausoleum of W.W. Poole. From there, people began saying Poole's tomb held a vampire. It's a pretty strong image. Tunnel collapse, people dying, a monster emerges, runs into a cemetery, and then just disappears into a tomb. The real tunnel is, of course, important. Church Hill Tunnel was built by the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad in the 1870s under Richmond's Church Hill District. It was roughly 4,000 feet long, but it had a bad reputation from the start, because Richmond's unstable soil made construction a bit dangerous. Multiple cave-ins happened during construction, and workers died even before the famous 1925 collapse. So even before the vampire story, the tunnel already had kind of a cursed energy. It was long, dark, dangerous, underground, and associated with deaths already in an old city. And it basically fertilized a pretty good urban legend. On October 2nd, 1925, the crews were pretty obviously working in the Church Hill Tunnel when it collapsed. Tons of earth fell, burying workers, train equipment, and a locomotive inside. Some men were able to escape, others were rescued, but most were trapped. The tunnel was eventually sealed, leaving parts of the work train and at least some human remains underground. But that part is not the legend. When the tunnel became so unstable, recovery efforts were obviously pretty limited. The city decided the safest option was again just seal the tunnel than risk more collapse. Later attempts to investigate found dangerous conditions including water and silt, which made the excavation risky. This means Richmond has a real buried disaster site under the city, and that alone can be pretty disturbing. But the most likely source of the creature who escaped that night was actually a real railroad worker named Benjamin F. Mosby. Mosby was a fireman on the locomotive when the tunnel collapsed, and the locomotive's boiler ruptured. Mosby was horribly burned and scalded. Some accounts say that he escaped or was pulled from the tunnel with severe injuries. Broken teeth, blood, burns, and skin hanging from his body. He later died at Grace Hospital, and this is probably where the vampire's description came from. Imagine for a moment just seeing this scene. A badly burned, half-conscious man stumbling out of a tunnel collapse in 1925. Just panic, steam, smoke, screams, and a man whose skin is literally peeling from his body. Over time, that image would mutate into something inhuman crawling out of that tunnel. It's the same pattern that we saw with Bunnyman Bridge. The legend is probably fake, but it was inspired by something extremely real. The vampire's appearance is pretty grounded when you look at the whole thing in context. Most of his teeth were probably broken. His skin was burned and peeling from a boiler exploding. His body was covered in blood and soot and dirt. He was likely in shock. To frighten witnesses, especially after retellings, he could easily be transformed into a monster or some weird creature. But it does get weird with Hollywood Cemetery. Hollywood Cemetery is one of Richmond's most famous historic cemeteries. It overlooks the James River and contains many major historical graves, including U.S. Presidents James Monroe, John Tyler, and the Confederate President Jefferson Davis, as well as thousands of Civil War dead. It is already an extremely gothic, historically loaded location. It is also near the Virginia Commonwealth University, which matters because college students usually help keep this vampire story alive. A huge cemetery besides a university is basically an urban legend machine, like a lot of the urban legends on this tier list. W.W. Poole's mausoleum, the tomb at the center of the story, belongs to William Wortham Poole. According to the legend, Poole was a vampire who had been driven out of England in the 1800s and eventually settled in Richmond. After his death, he was buried in Hollywood Cemetery, where his tomb became the hiding place of the creature from the tunnel. Now, this is more than likely false. The real Poole was not some ancient European vampire. He was reportedly a Mississippian-born man who worked as a clerk, bookkeeper, accountant, and private secretary. He lived a fairly normal, respectable life in Richmond and died in the early 1920s before the Church Hill tunnel collapsed. But why him? His mausoleum looks kind of weird to some. Weird enough to attract some stories. It's built into a hillside, which gives it kind of a crypt-like feeling, and the tomb has some design elements that some people have interpreted as strange, including Masonic and Egyptian-looking features. Some retellings even say that the double W in W.W. Poole can look like fangs, which is a little silly, but funny. And it may sound dumb, but again, that's how local legends work. Creepy-looking tomb, weird name, cemetery full of college students, nearby disaster story, and eventually someone says, hey, remember that one guy who looked like a monster? That's where he is. He lives there. And now it's folklore. Richmond Vampire was probably not originally one clean story. It was probably the two separate legends that just kind of merged together. First, with Poole being a vampire, and then the Churchill Tunnel collapse story. Earlier versions of the vampire legend were originally circulating orally by the 1960s and appeared in print in a VCU student newspaper in 1976. The tunnel collapse version, where the creature runs from the tunnel to the tomb, seems to be a newer fusion that became more visible online in the 2000s. So the legend just kind of evolved. The cemetery had its own vampire, the tunnel had a monster, you just combine the two, it's a monster-looking vampire, and of course, as the legend grew, Poole's mausoleum attracted unwanted attention. Like I said, there's a lot of college students. They were probably there, sneaking into the cemetery, daring each other to visit the graves at night, just kind of fueling the fire here. There were reports of vandalism, occult symbols, and people actually trying to break into the tomb, which is a pretty big no-no, as well as some strange objects being left at the tomb's doors. Some sources say the remains of Poole and his wife were eventually removed because of the vandalism and break-ins, which is something I'm not advocating for at all. I think it's bad. If you're gonna go visit a graveyard, be respectful, for real. I've gone to my haunted graveyards. I've done that, but you don't touch anything, you don't mess with the stuff, you look. You look and you pay respects to whoever's passed and is buried there, and then you move on. Don't vandalize it. Look, I get it. Like, it makes things look more haunted. It can be fun with your friends to do stupid shit, but that's just mean. It's disrespectful, it's mean. Don't do it. It's not cool. That's how you get demons invited into your life, pal. So, when you're getting haunted by a demon, and I'm doing just fine because I wasn't being a jackass in a cemetery, you're gonna be sorry. But whatever. The realistic explanation of what happens is this. In 1925, Church Hill Tunnel collapses. Benjamin Mosby was horribly injured and burned after the boiler ruptured. Witnesses saw a horrifically injured man emerge from the disaster. Over time, his appearance and the way he ran through the city was exaggerated into a creature story. Separately, students and local stories about the mausoleum and the cemetery being the resting place of a vampire grew. Eventually, those two stories merged together. There is no evidence that Poole was a vampire. There's no evidence that a supernatural creature caused the total collapse or ran through the city that night. But this real disaster is obviously horrifying enough to create a legend. The Niles Canyon Ghost is a Californian ghost legend centered around Niles Canyon, which is a winding canyon road connecting Fremont to Sunol in the San Francisco Bay Area. For decades, drivers have reported encounters with a mysterious woman who appears alongside the road. Now, the first thing you have to understand is that Niles Canyon does have to work itself. Niles Canyon is exactly the kind of place where people are going to see ghosts. The canyon follows Alameda Creek through a narrow valley between Fremont and Sunol, and historically it was a stagecoach route, a railroad route, and a transportation corridor, as well as the site of numerous accidents. The road itself is winding and narrow, and at night it can become extremely dark. Steep hills will rise on both sides, and there are stretches where you feel completely isolated, despite being near one of the biggest population centers in California. One of the most famous stories goes something like this. A driver is driving through Niles Canyon late at night. It's raining or foggy, sometimes both. The driver will then see a young woman standing on the side of the road, wearing white. Driver will then pull over and offer her a ride, to which she quietly gets in the car. A few minutes later, the driver notices something strange. The woman has just disappeared. He didn't hear anything. There was no door open, no sound heard. She was just gone. And that's the version that most Californians know. What's interesting is that it follows a classic vanishing hitchhiker story almost perfectly. The second common variation follows that formula even more closely. The woman will give her address to the driver, he takes her there, but when he arrives, she's gone. She disappeared. The driver then will look around confused, someone will answer, and the driver explains, "I just brought what I assumed was your daughter home," to which the resident will respond, "That's impossible, she died years ago." It happens everywhere. Niles Canyon simply adopted this story to its local geography. In another version, the ghost will appear near one of the bridges crossing the Alameda Creek. Here, the woman is often connected to a fatal car accident. The story claims she died after her vehicle crashed into the water or simply just run off the road. Now she appears at the location where she was killed. Drivers will often see her standing near the bridge. Some will stop, some will just keep going. Many later report seeing her in their rear view mirrors. Then she just disappears. This version is especially believable because Niles Canyon really has had many fatal car accidents over the years. Because, well, it's a winding canyon road. Yeah, that happens, especially in the Bay Area where it gets foggy and rainy a lot. But one of the most consistent details and what makes this story stick out among a lot of other hitchhiker stories is the white dress. Many witnesses describe seeing her in a white dress, or just white clothing, pale clothing in general. And again, this isn't necessarily unique to Niles Canyon. It plays into one of the oldest ghost motifs there is, the woman in white. That's everywhere, but Niles Canyon fits neatly into that tradition. The white dress immediately signals this isn't a normal hitchhiker. It's basically folklore shorthand for ghost. Or runaway bride, I guess, but I guess that doesn't matter. But here's where things get a little more interesting though. Unlike Kate Morgan or the Richmond Vampire or even Bunnyman, there's no real historical basis or death that created this ghost. No confirmed victim, no confirmed accident, not even one confirmed woman. There are dozens of possible candidates. Over the decades, various storytellers have attached the legend to different train accidents, stagecoach crashes, drownings, murders, or automobile accidents. But none of these explanations have emerged as the definitive origin. That suggests the legend may not be based on one person at all. And like I mentioned in the hitchhiker story from Tier 1, driving at night creates the perfect conditions for ghost stories. Drivers are usually isolated. They're tired because it's late at night when a lot of these stories happen, and they're focused on very limited visual information. Road signs, shadows, reflections, brief glimpses of movement, all these things are really easy to misinterpret. Add fog, rain, headlights, and winding roads, and you basically created the perfect conditions for an unusual experience. I have my own personal story like this. I was driving super late at night through rural New Mexico in the middle of nowhere. I was exhausted. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning and all of my friends were asleep in the car. As I'm driving, I'm blinking, trying to stay awake as best I can, and I start hallucinating. There are a lot of stories where people see things while driving late at night, and apparently I was one of them. There was one point where I blinked and I saw two figures standing in the middle of the road. They looked like little Eskimos to me. I don't know. They had those big parkas on, and they were short and small, almost like the ice climbers from Smash Bros. But for a split second, I really thought I hit them with my car. I kind of freaked out. Then I looked behind me, and there was nothing there. And that just goes to show how easy it is to misinterpret things, or honestly almost hallucinate, when you're exhausted and driving down an isolated road at night. But there are other connections to the story. Some versions will tie the ghost to a historical railroad running through the canyon. The canyon has, of course, been associated with rail traffic, and accidents have occurred throughout its history. Because trains are so deeply connected to American ghost lore, storytellers naturally begin linking the ghost to these railroad tragedies. Some versions will say she was struck by the train. Again, there's no evidence of that, but it does add a little more weight to the story. In another variation, the ghost is crying. Drivers will see the woman sitting beside the road and appearing upset. Sometimes she begs and asks for help. Sometimes she simply stares downward, crying. And this version, of course, feels more tragic than frightening, because the ghost isn't hurting anyone, or at least it doesn't seem that way. She just seems to be trapped in an endless repetition of her final moments. Also, she could be La Llorona. I know that kind of plays into that. There is a river nearby, or creek, and California has plenty of La Llorona stories. Which, I don't think she's on this list at all, American Urban Legends, and I get that she's a Latin American legend first, I get that, but I feel like she's just as much an American Urban Legend at this point as well, because, I mean, it's everywhere in America. I mean, we made a movie about it, but yeah, just kind of plays into it. And like Bunnyman Bridge and a lot of these other stories, this one is heavily fueled by teenagers. And a lot of these urban legends on Tier 3 are basically dare urban legends. I dare you to go look. I dare you to go down that road. That kind of thing. And every generation inherits the legend from the previous one. That's how these stories survive. Not because they're true per se, but because they're retold. And even today, people will still claim to see a woman standing beside the road, dressed in white, trying to hitch a ride. In 1955, James Dean died in his Porsche 550 Spider, nicknamed the Little Bastard. He died after only having the car for a week. However, that is only the beginning of this legendary, cursed car. James Dean was one of the biggest stars in America at the time. He had already completed East of Eden, Rebel Without a Cause, and Giant. But Dean wasn't just an actor, he was also obsessed with racing. Friends, studio executives, and family members all worried about his driving. But Dean loved speed, and spent much of his free time competing in amateur road races. On September 21st, 1955, Dean purchased a new Porsche 550 Spider. The 550 Spider was essentially a race car that just happened to be legal on public roads. It was extremely fast, extremely light, and notoriously unforgiving. Dean had racing numbers printed on it and added a nickname to the rear of the car, Little Bastard. The nickname reportedly came from Dean's friends and his rebellious reputation. The car would only be in Dean's possession for about 9 days though. And this is where the legend begins. About a week before Dean died, he reportedly met actor Alec Guinness. Yes, the Alec Guinness, Obi-Wan Kenobi. And according to Guinness's later recounts, Dean showed him his new Porsche and was very excited about it. But Guinness claimed he immediately felt uneasy looking at the car. And years later, he wrote that the car looked sinister. According to Guinness, he told Dean something very close to, "If you get into that car, you'll be found dead within a week." Dean, of course, laughed it off, which in fairness, I probably would too if someone told me that. But 7 days later, he was dead. Now, was this a genuine psychic premonition? No, but the fact that Guinness had told this story long before the cursed legend really exploded is one of the reasons it remains so famous. And for storytellers, it's basically the perfect opening scene. On September 30th, 1955, Dean was driving towards a race event in Salinas, California. His mechanic, Rolf Wolthric, rode with him. At approximately 5:45 p.m., another driver, Donald Turnipseed, turned left across Dean's path at an intersection near Colomé, California. Dean's Porsche slammed right into the other vehicle, and the impact was, of course, devastating. Dean suffered catastrophic injuries and died shortly afterwards. Woolrich survived but was seriously injured, and Turnipseed survived with only minor injuries. Dean was only 24 years old. If the story ended there, Little Bastard would simply be remembered as the car James Dean died in. But instead, things got a little weirder. After the crash, the wrecked Porsche was acquired by a custom car designer, George Barris. George Barris would later become one of the primary sources behind the cursed stories. Barris genuinely thought the car was cursed. Others simply think he enjoyed the publicity it brought him. Either which way, the curse stories trace back to him. According to Barris, the curse begins almost immediately. While unloading the wrecked Porsche, it allegedly slipped and fell, seriously injuring a mechanic. Depending on the version of the story, the mechanic either suffered a broken leg or other really major injuries. Now, one incident could be a coincidence, sure, but this is only the beginning. The wrecked Porsche was then stripped for usable parts, and 2 racers obtained components from Little Bastard. One racer used the engine, another used the suspension and drivetrain parts. During one of their first racing events with the new parts, one of the drivers crashed and survived, but the other, Troy McHenry, was killed after his vehicle struck a tree. Now, was the car cursed? Probably not at this point at least, but imagine hearing that the wreckage of James Dean's car had already been linked to another fatality. The legend practically writes itself at that point. According to later retellings, the 2 tires salvaged from the wreck were also sold separately. Both supposedly blew out at the same time during use, causing another accident. This story is harder to verify than the racing deaths, but it became part of the growing curse mythology. One of the strangest chapters came from the remains of Little Bastard, which were displayed as part of a traffic safety exposition. The wreck toured schools, auto shows, and safety events, and the goal was obviously simple: show teenagers what being a dumbass and Little Bastard could do to you. Don't drive like an idiot, kids, but instead of getting the intended message, people started treating the object like a cursed artifact of sorts. In 1959, while being stored before another display, the wreck reportedly caught fire. And the strange part is that the surrounding area suffered damage, but the Porsche itself sustained only limited damage. And this is one of those stories that just becomes more supernatural with each telling. The original event was a minor fire, but the legend became the cursed car survived a mysterious blaze, which I can't lie, it is a little weird. Not that the car survived, that makes enough sense to me. More how the fire started. But later on, the truck transporting the wreck allegedly lost control. The driver was then thrown from the truck, and the wrecked Porsche fell and crushed him to death. Like many of the other curse stories we've told, details do vary depending on the source, but this one became one of those central pieces of the curse narrative. Another famous story claims that while the wreck was on display, part of the vehicle suddenly broke loose and injured a student. Again, not necessarily proof of a curse, just another strange incident attached to the object. Then comes the biggest mystery of the whole thing. In 1960, Little Bastard vanished. According to the most famous version of the story, the wreck was being transported in a sealed shipment, and when it arrived at its destination, the car was just gone. No explanation, no recovery, no remains. And to this day, the location of most of the car is completely unknown. That disappearance elevated the story from a cursed legend to an actual mystery. But there are questions that divide the researchers. Many historians believe that George Barris played a major role in popularizing the curse, and some of the incidents can be verified, others are much harder to trace. Critics argue that Barris had every incentive to keep the legend alive because it kept public interest focused on the car. In other words, the curse may be partially manufactured, but that doesn't necessarily mean all the events were manufactured. Little Bastard hits just about every urban legend trigger you can imagine. A youth celebrity, a tragic death, a prophetic warning, a cursed object, multiple accidents, more deaths, and to top it all off, a mysterious disappearance. Sounds like a weird screenplay, and it probably inspired Rubber, or whatever that movie's called, with the haunted tire that kills people. Stupid movie, by the way. But what most likely happened was James Dean died in a tragic accident. The wrecked car was dismantled, and several unfortunate events involving people connected to the wreckage. George Barris then helped publicize those events because either he thought the car was legitimately cursed, or he thought it could help his business, or he just wanted his 15 minutes of fame. And then the curse was born. There's not necessarily any supernatural explanation required, but at the same time, it is a lot of strange coincidences to happen around one car. More than anything, it's the fact that the story just keeps going, you know? At a university, a young woman is spending the evening at a party. She returns to her dorm late at night and notices that something just feels off. There's a slight strange smell, and she calls to her roommate, but the roommate doesn't answer. Just seems weirdly quiet in the room. But she assumes that her roommate is just sleeping, and she decides not to wake her up. So she leaves the lights off and goes to bed. The next morning she wakes up and she just hears a little drip, drip, drip. She thinks that maybe in her drunken stupor that she left the faucet on, and she gets up, and as soon as her feet touch the ground, she feels something sticky, liquid, She thinks that maybe she even threw up last night, and she goes over to turn on the lights. And that's when she notices all the red. The bottom of her feet stained, the floor coated, the walls. The walls share a red message. Aren't you glad you didn't turn on the lights? Her roommate had been murdered, and the killer was there the entire time. Now, obviously, this is a pretty sad urban legend. It's not necessarily a super legendary story, but it is a good one. It's a very solid urban legend. And that line changes everything. Because obviously the first horror is that your roommate is dead. That's upsetting. Although some people would probably be pretty happy about that, you know. I had good roommates myself, so I don't have that problem. But anyways, it doesn't matter. The real horror is that you slept right next to the killer's work all night. He saw you there. He was there. I say he, they. A woman can be a serial killer, guys. A woman can be a murderer. We're all for gender equality on this channel, but yeah. You were right next to the killer. It's crazy. Folklorists have traced versions of this story back for decades. Many researchers believe it was circulating by at least the 1960s or at least the 70s on college campuses. Some versions are even older and resemble more of a Victorian cautionary tale. Most people think it originated from a real murder, but it probably did not. It appears to just be folklore from the beginning. And the story almost always happens in a dorm. That is not an accident. College students are a perfect audience for horror stories like this. You're living away from home, probably for the first time. You're often sharing a room with someone that you don't typically know very well. You're in an unfamiliar building surrounded by hundreds of strangers, and the environment just creates anxiety. The legend exploits that anxiety. You're not as safe as you think you are. That's basically what I'm saying. Most murder stories do focus on the victim, though, and this story focuses on their survivor. And it's kind of unusual in that regard. The roommate who survives isn't brave. She doesn't fight a killer. She doesn't even escape. There's no intelligence, no skill. It's just luck. And that randomness is terrifying. The story asks, what if the only reason you're alive is because the killer didn't notice you, or rather that the killer was too busy murdering someone else? It's much more unsettling than the idea of the traditional, some guy broke into my house and tried to kill me. No, he got somebody. He got your roommate. You just weren't perceptive enough to notice it. And you got lucky that he didn't decide to take you out too. One of the reasons the legend spreads so easily is because it's incredibly adaptable as well. The core structure can always stay the same, but the details can constantly change. Sometimes the survivor is returning from a date. Sometimes she's coming back from studying, if you want to be more studious, I guess. Sometimes she hears a strange noise, smells blood, or notices a wet floor, and sometimes she even sees a hand hanging off the bed. Every storyteller can tweak the details to their liking. And it's such an easy story to localize, because you can always say, this happened at my college, it happened at this dorm, in this resident hall, in that floor, whatever. It's a very flexible story in that regard. There's another common variation that includes a shared bathroom. One student will enter the room but doesn't use the bathroom until the next morning, and when she finally opens the bathroom door, that's where she discovers the body. And instead of the message being on the wall, it's written across like the bathroom mirror saying like, oh, you're next, or aren't you glad you didn't turn on the lights, or I don't know, maybe glad you didn't take a shit. I don't know the full details. But a lot of the appeal of this story is also the delay. It sounds like a weird, normal story that someone could tell, theoretically, about coming home from a party late at night. Many people start stories off that way. But the framing of it, and the way you would actually tell the story, you'd say it's probably something scary. You wouldn't just lead off with this. So I assume you're just waiting for that punchline. You're waiting for something bad to happen. And it just doesn't, and it doesn't, and it doesn't. She gets home. Nothing really too out of the ordinary is happening. Weird noise here and there, whatever. And then the reveal. That's pretty terrifying. And can you imagine that, just by the way? Like, you wake up thinking your friend was just asleep that night, or maybe they had a nightcap with someone at worst. And then you find them under the bed, or on their bed just mutilated. It's horrifying. It's one of the reasons the legend does remain so popular. It's just plausible. Like, I'm sure everyone's experienced something like this before. Your mom comes home late one night, or she doesn't answer the phone immediately, and your brain goes to, oh my god, she's dead, isn't she? Oh my god, there's a terrible car accident, or whatever. There's a Johnny Bravo clip that makes this exact joke. The point is, our brains immediately jump to the darkest possible conclusion. So when you hear a story like this, every time you come home and something feels just a little bit off, your brain's gonna remember that, and that's why this legend spreads so quickly. You don't just hear it once, you carry it with you. Now, did this happen? No, this exact story is almost certainly not real. Now, similar murders have probably happened. I know Ted Bundy got some people in there. Sorority houses or dorms, which is, again, tragic. People have returned home to discover victims, and people have unknowingly slept near crime scenes. But that doesn't necessarily mean this exact story ever happened. It's folklore. But honestly, aren't you glad you didn't turn on the light? I love this one. It's called Love RollerCoaster Scream. And it's in reference to Love RollerCoaster, which is a funk hit from 1975 by the Ohio Players. And I gotta say this, I have a bit of beef with the Ohio Players. I like to play Rocket League in my free time, and one of my friends has Funky Worm by the Ohio Players as his player anthem. I hate that effing song. It makes me want to die. It pisses me off beyond belief. But anyways, they made a love song called Love RollerCoaster, and it became the #1 US hit in January 1976. But it also picked up one of the strangest urban legends of the 70s. Now, is this a false rumor? Yeah, it is. But the way it spread is actually really fascinating, and it goes something like this. The Ohio Players are in their studio recording Love RollerCoaster. During the session, someone is heard either in or near the studio murdering a woman. Her scream is accidentally captured on the track. The band either doesn't notice, covers it up, or just decides to keep it in the song. Listeners later hear the scream buried in the mix and realize they're listening to a real death. That's the simple version. Again, it's not a real death. It's bullshit. It's complete bullshit, but it's effective bullshit. There really is a scream in the song, and that is why the rumor does work. It appears between the breakdown sections between a minute 24 and a minute 28 in the single version. I'll play it right quick. Quick, it's high pitched, and yeah, holy shit, it does sound like a legit death screech if you're looking for it. And it sounds super unsettling when you're listening for it. Once someone tells you it's a woman being murdered, your brain just kind of starts to hear it that way. You see a lot of these in those experiments where it's, oh, if you read it, it sounds something like this, but if you read that, then it sounds completely different. And it's just that your brain wants to hear it in that regard. But that's basically the entire urban legend. Now, according to the Ohio Players drummer, Jimmy Diamond Williams, the scream was not a murder. It was keyboardist Billy Beck doing a high, inhaled vocal screech during the break. Williams compared it to the kind of extreme high note singers like Minnie Riperton or Mariah Carey could hit. So yeah, the real explanation is pretty boring, and if you do listen to the full song, they are doing a bunch of weird little howls and screams right before that. That one just sounds so different. It's a really weird vocal sound, and a rumor turned it into a murder. But this is where the legend gets more specific. The Ohio Players were known for erotic album covers. Their album Honey, which this song was on, featured model Esther Cordette covered in, well, honey. The cover already had a sensational, slightly provocative image, which made it much easier for rumors to attach themselves to the record. The scream belongs to Esther Cordette. The rumor claims that she was either stabbed in the studio, or, if you want to know the more funny thing, was burned by the hot honey during the album cover shoot. And then it goes right back to they killed her because she threatened to sue them because of it. Or she was just murdered by a band member, manager, or engineer. None of that is true. The stories about Cordette being injured, killed, or recorded screaming on the song are completely false. Another version removes her entirely. In this telling, the victim is a cleaning lady, a secretary, a girlfriend, or just a random woman in the studio. It really doesn't matter, but it does show the flexibility of the rumor because, well, it's a rumor. It doesn't need a consistent victim, it just needed the scream. And the rumors appeared to have started because of a joke made by a local DJ on the radio. The commonly repeated explanation is that a DJ in California, possibly Berkeley, not quite sure, heard some different rumors, but that seems to be one of the earliest one I found, made an offhand comment suggesting the scream sounded like someone being killed. From there, the joke just kind of spread, and honestly, it's a really believable origin story. A DJ made a dark joke. Some idiot listening says, shit, that's gotta be right, that's gotta be true. Then other DJs repeat it. Suddenly the jokes become, I heard it on the radio, and once a rumor becomes something people heard on the radio, it gains authority. The rumor spread even further when Casey Kasem, yes, that Casey Kasem, the voice actor from Scooby-Doo, he voices Shaggy. He repeated this on America Top 40 in early 1976. And because that show was nationally syndicated, even a casual mention could launch a story across the entire country. That's a huge reason this rumor became national. Remember, this was before social media, like most of the things on this list. And the radio could still make something go viral though. It wasn't even that hard. The Ohio players did eventually deny the rumor, as they should, but according to Jimmy Diamond Williams, the band also realized something important. The rumor was selling records. Williams said people kept asking whether they killed a girl in the studio, and the band stayed quiet because, truthfully, the controversy just pushed their sales. No PR is bad PR, or all PR is good PR, whatever. And honestly, that's probably the most believable part of the entire story. They didn't murder anyone, but they weren't gonna kill the rumor because it made people so curious that it got them to buy the record. That's so incredibly music industry, which seems like a awful place to be. You won't catch my ass doing music anytime soon, guys, I promise. The legend also becomes a much larger family of music urban legends. People have always believed songs contained hidden evil messages, secret recordings, or accidental captures of real tragedies. It always makes me think back to that Gravity Falls episode where Robbie gives Wendy a song that secretly has mind control powers. It's funny, it's silly, it's a goofy concept. There's also another conspiracy theory, this one's not as funny or silly, alleging that audio in certain songs have some pretty awful content in them, hidden in the background, and it's awful. I'm not gonna fully get into it because truth be told, it just makes me super uncomfortable, and it makes me want to puke thinking about it. So yeah, hidden messages and hidden music urban legends have always been a huge thing. This rumor became famous enough that in 1998, the horror movie Urban Legend even references it. That movie is literally built entirely around urban legends, so it just goes to show how deep Love RollerCoaster made it into pop culture. So, the Love RollerCoaster scream was not a murder. It was a vocal flourish that became an urban legend because a radio DJ made a bad joke, and a lot of people took it way too seriously.
So the officer and I went out there to take a look at it. You know, he just tried to chew in around the doors. And you could see a dog print, you know, alongside the window there. And so it was, you know, obviously a dog.
In Wexford County, Michigan, in 1887, two lumberjacks were exploring the woods looking for good trees to chop down. As they looked through a foggy morning, they saw something in the distance. It looked tall, but it was dark, wrong. One of the lumberjacks decided to move a little closer to it, trying to spot what this thing could be, if it was maybe even a tree. But when he got a good look at it, he turned around and ran, grabbing his lumberjack buddy, and they ran out of the woods. Later, they described what they saw as a 7-foot-tall, bipedal canine creature like man. He had the torso and body of a man, but a dog or even wolf-like head. His eyes were blue, shining blue. And when he howled, it sounded almost like a human scream. And truth be told, it sounds a lot like Blade from Elden Ring. That's my man right there. Now granted, I had to kill him because he went crazy, but I took his fit afterward, and man, I looked fucking cool. But yeah, this is a very classic urban legend in the state of Michigan, and it mostly clusters around northern Michigan. especially the northwestern Lower Peninsula, which is already the perfect setting for this kind of story. Logging woods, thick woods, isolated roads, lakes, and cabins. Places where a person can very easily convince themselves that something is watching them from the tree line. The legend says that somewhere in the Michigan woods, usually at night, a person will see what they first assume is a very large dog, maybe even a wolf or bear. But then it stands up, and it's not just a big scary dog or bear, it's a dog-like thing that moves like a man. Witnesses often describe it as 7 feet tall, covered in dark fur, extremely muscular, kind of based, dog-headed or wolf-headed, walking upright with a scream-like howl. Now, I am no biologist. That does not seem to be a normal animal. And apparently it doesn't act like one either. It will stare at you for too long. It watches people. It walks on its hind legs. It appears near roads, cabins, farms, forests, or logging areas. And then it just disappears before anyone can prove anything. And the Michigan Dogman works because it triggers a primal fear. That animal is acting too human. It's the uncanny valley. A wolf is scary. A man can be scary as well. Something that's both is so much worse. And that's why werewolf legends exist in the first place. Dogman is basically Michigan's local werewolf, just with enough regional flavor to feel like its own thing. And the oldest and most famous version is that 1887 Wexford County sighting that I mentioned. And the details that they say get repeated in almost every summary of the legend of the Dogman, and kind of gives it a strong connection to that logging country. And that of course matters because lumberjack folklore is already full of exaggerated creatures. Wendigoon actually has some great videos on this, by the way. He talked about the fearsome creatures. It's awesome. So even if the 1887 story is just folklore, it does fit perfectly into the environment where this kind of folklore naturally grows. One of the stranger aspects, though, of the urban legend is a 10-year cycle. The story claims that Dogman only appears in years ending in 7. So 1887, 1897, 1907, 1917, and so on and so forth. The detail became so popular largely because in 1987, a song revived the legend. Now, is there any real evidence that this cycle exists? No, of course, but it is a good storytelling device. It gives the creature a ritualistic quality, almost like a curse or prophecy of sorts, instead of just a random sighting. There's a pattern, and patterns make people pay attention. Another commonly repeated account comes from Paris, Michigan, usually dated to 1937, another year ending 7, of course, where a man named Robert Fortney reportedly claimed that he was attacked by a pack of wild dogs, but one of them stood upright on 2 legs. And this version makes Dogman less of a lone werewolf and more like something hiding among ordinary animals. Most of the pack was normal, but one wasn't, and he was like their leader. Which reminds me, of course, of Red Dead Redemption 2, which we're playing right now. Probably, I think that's on screen. There's a random encounter where you're attacked by a pack of wolves. Leading them is this creepy hairy man who runs with them and howls alongside them. That is basically Dogman, except he's short and ugly, and Dogman is cool, 7-foot tall Jack Chad Dogman. He's cool. The legend also includes reports from places like Alger County during the 1950s and Manstey and Cross Village in 1967. These reports are part of why Dogman feels like a statewide legend rather than a single local story. It's not tied to one bridge like some other stuff, or a cemetery, or even just one road. It's tied to Michigan's woods as a whole, and that can be scary in a different way. You're not looking for one haunted location, you can look at the entire map and think, fuck, this thing could be anywhere. But the modern Dogman legend really exploded in 1987 because of the song I mentioned earlier. It was made by Stephen Cook and put on by himself, because he was a DJ, of Traverse Radio. Which, of course, another DJ. We just finished talking about them, but oh well. But he recorded a song called The Legend of the Michigan Dogman as an April Fool's joke. He wasn't trying to document a real monster, he was just making a spooky novelty song. But the joke got away from him, much like Love RollerCoaster. After the song aired, listeners started calling and claiming they saw something similar. The song became incredibly popular, and over time, Cook reportedly received more than 100 Dogman reports, which makes the story even more fascinating. Dogman may have existed as scattered folklore before 1987, as we've talked about, but the song really gave it a name, a structure, a timeline, and a mythology, and that's a huge difference. Before Steve Cook, it was just scattered stories about some weird bipedal dog creature. After Steve Cook, there was the Michigan Dogman. It reminds me of course, Slender Man, which I talk about Slender Man all the time in these videos, I'm realizing, and I don't even think he's on the list. Anyway, it starts as an internet creation before becoming actual folklore. The artificial origin doesn't stop people from having a genuine experience afterward. The legend becomes a container. People who saw a strange wolf, a bear, a shadow, or just something they couldn't explain in the Michigan woods now have a name for that: Dogman. And this is where skeptics had probably their strongest argument. The song exploded on April Fool's Day. It was an April Fool's Day song. So the story could easily just be considered manufactured. Steve Cook himself admitted the song was a prank. He was skeptical of the creature, but believers argue the exact opposite. They say Cook accidentally tapped into older stories that were already true. That's really the debate. Did the song create Dogman, or did it uncover something that people were already seeing? Cook originally credited the song to Bob Farley, which is a name that was used as part of the joke. The track was intentionally presented like an old local legend rather than just a goofy song that someone had written up. And that framing of course matters because listeners weren't listening to, hey guys, here's my super funny, silly, fake April Fool's song. No. They just listened to an old Michigan legend that they may not have known already. The song became so popular that cassette tapes were eventually sold. The proceeds reportedly then went to an animal shelter, which is kind of wholesome. Terrifying werewolf cryptid ended up raising money for actual dogs, which is sweet. But there's also more pieces of Dogman lore. The Gable film. And this isn't part of the original legend, but it became a huge part of Dogman internet culture. The Gable film is an old home movie showing a family outdoors before a strange creature suddenly charges the camera. Now, for years, people believed that this was, of course, the Michigan Dogman. Eventually, the footage was revealed to be a hoax created for entertainment and connected to Monster Quest. Still, before that reveal, it added a ton of fuel to the Dogman discussions. People finally had something visual to point at. And just like Bigfoot, even a blurry photo or video or whatever it could be, even just a dark silhouette on the road, becomes potential evidence. Even fake footage gives people something to argue about, and honestly, that's how these myths grow. Dogman is often compared to a werewolf, but there is a real difference. A werewolf is usually a human who transforms into a wolf-like monster. Dogman is his own thing. He's his own species. He's not cursed, he's not necessarily like a human, he's not tied to any full moon or something. He's more like a hidden forest predator. And honestly, I think they missed a golden opportunity. You already got the creature appearing every 10 years, just call him a werewolf. There you go. Done. I don't think it's that complicated, but who knows. Next year's 2027, so maybe we'll see Dogman again. Okay, so I thought the last couple videos were long. This video is obviously way longer. It's taking me more time than I thought it would. I've had a busy week, so I do apologize for this coming out later than intended. But thank you so much for watching, you guys. Oh my gosh, I really do appreciate it. We're actually hitting some milestones. I think we're pretty close to 300 subscribers. Should hit that pretty soon. It's also America's 250th birthday, so it's the perfect time to just kick back and listen to some American Urban Legends. So if you haven't watched the first two parts, I'd recommend watching those as soon as you can. Just relax and enjoy the Americana. But for real, you guys, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for watching all my videos and Instagram shorts and whatever it is. My Instagram follower count on Dr. Soapbox is about to beat my actual Instagram account, for followers numbers at least, which I don't know how I feel about that, but I know it's a positive feeling. So thank you to everyone. Thank you so much for your support. I'm so happy to have you here, and I will catch you all in Tier 3, Part 2. That's right, this is just Part 1. We have so much more to cover in this tier alone, and some of them get absolutely wild. So thank you again, have a blessed day, and I'll see you in the next one.